Come on. Why are we failing to go live? What are we doing? Come on.
I'm showing live.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. That was weird. Okay, well, hey, welcome to episode 146 of the Comic Watchers Show. I'm your host, Matt. With me, as always, is Mike Eakins from the mighty state of Virginia. Mike, how the heck are you? We have got author of both comics and book form, Greg Hurwitz, hanging out with us this week. Greg has a brand new comic called Knighted that just shipped today. It has got fantastic art by Mark Texeira, and it is from AWA. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it just dropped today, so you guys are my first interview where Knighted is live in the world.
That's pretty awesome, dude. I feel a touch honored by that. So, man, tell for those who are unfamiliar, because Knighted, brand new property, brand new concept. Tell us about the world of Knighted.
Well, Knighted takes place in the Resistance that Straczynski's been playing with in AWA.
Okay.
But it was really important to me to also write a book that can be a standalone, that people can just pick up and read. And so it's dropped into that world, but it also stands on its own 2 feet. And the premise really is, what if a guy who's an ordinary guy, a little bit of a doormat, he's still trying to figure out how to find his voice in his own life with his girlfriend at his job. But what if a guy like that, a guy who's a lot like, let's say, Peter Parker, accidentally kills the city's only superhero and then is forced to fill the boots and take over that role, which is the last thing in the world that he wants to do. And so I opened the book with a scene of him. He's down on one knee in a restaurant proposing to his girlfriend. The ring's out. Everyone's waiting. The champagne's ready to pop. And the first line of dialogue in the comic is his girlfriend looking at him and saying, "No." And it just
goes, that opening is brutal.
It goes down from there. And basically he has to figure out, one thing leads to another. And he has to basically figure out how he's going to do this impossible thing that's been laid before him after accidentally killing the Knight of New York City.
And, Bob, our everyman, he has a lot going against him. He's dating the daughter of the commissioner, which would seem like an upside, but he's stuck in, as she puts it, a job with the police that is middle management with no upper management. How exactly did you come by that? Because I actually thought that was a pretty clever quirk.
Well, thank you. I thought about it that, I'm always, for some reason, I like all these interfamilial dynamics. It's always interesting to give some texture for characters to grab hold of. And I thought it'd be really interesting if I had this character who, he's a civilian crime analyst, as she says, like you're a civilian crime analyst in a place that only, you don't have a badge, right? You're not even a real cop. And he's dating the commissioner's daughter, but the commissioner is kind of a hard ass, right? And he's given him no hand up, no anything. But everybody in the station thinks that he's gotten some advantage from his girlfriend's dad, even though he hasn't. So he's got kind of the worst of both worlds. He's got the association that he hasn't earned his place there, as someone who's kind of looked down upon as a crime analyst. And he doesn't actually get any help from that whatsoever, but everyone in the office kind of resents him and talks down to him. And he's just really an ordinary, nice guy. And we'll find out that the original Knight, the guy who wore the cowl and drives the Knightmobile and does all those other things that might be slightly reminiscent of a certain other character that I wrote for a couple of years. And the guy who used to fill that identity is not a nice guy by any stretch of the imagination. And he's been done away with. He's a little bit of a douchebag. I think that's the technical term for it.
I think that's the best term. Mike, why don't you jump in, buddy? Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Greg, again, thanks for hanging out with us. With your time on Wolverine and Batman and stuff, it seems like you really enjoy writing that vigilante and getting into the mind of that vigilante character. What is it now? We have the Knighted. What is it about writing vigilantes that keeps you interested and keeps you going?
It's an interesting question. I'm really interested in that through my whole career. Novels too. I mean, I write a character called Orphan X, who's also a vigilante character on the novel side. And I think that part of it is I feel like we've gotten so far. There's so much corruption in our system. And by that, I don't mean it in a generic way, pointing to one side or another. I mean, everything feels just choked up with spin and with bureaucracy and with outcomes. And there's something about vigilantism that a man or a woman with a code, right, who's acting directly on something that they believe, who's acting on their own moral instinct, is so compelling to me. And it's so immediate in a world that seems increasingly spun, and like you can't rely on getting the sort of justice and fair shake that we used to think was possible. It's just not something that you can rely on in the public sphere, right? In a lot of different places.
Right.
And so there's something about somebody who's an individual who has their own code that they do everything to live up to, and they have to hold true to that, is really interesting to me. And this is my first time really dealing with somebody on their way into finding that code. And seeing also, if nice guys finish last, which is Bob when we meet him, and he learn enough to stay a nice guy, to bring us with him on this journey, but also to figure out how to embody a toughness and a firmness that's really a necessity for him becoming a better man than he is.
Well, I think that's really interesting too, because of course, a moral code and what's right and wrong is so subjective. So there's so many shades of gray you can play with in there, right? Like I remember back when you first started getting into comics writing, after, of course, having been a successful novelist for a while then. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Punisher that you first came in with. That's a pretty far extreme of a man with a code. And then we've got Moon Knight, we've got Batman, Wolverine, etc., and now the Knight. And it's depending on who you ask, of course, you're gonna get a different response as to whether or not this guy is right. You get the same type of rhetorical action out of Dirty Harry conversation, right? So I definitely smell what you're cooking there, as opposed to, say, writing Superman. It's like, of course Superman's good. He's Superman, right? But then there's this whole other side of you where I'm looking and I'm like, wait a minute, this guy's written about Shakespeare. He knows things. He's not just the crime guy. How do all of these various interests and your personal history all find themselves coming together and intermeshing in your, not just in comics, but in your writing in general?
That's a really interesting question. I did study Shakespeare quite a bit, and people tend to be surprised by that. They're like, why would you go from studying Shakespeare to writing crime fiction?
Yeah.
And, I was particularly fascinated with the tragedies, and people forget, Shakespeare was the equivalent of a best-selling author, right? He wasn't trying to be highfalutin and have his name preserved for the annals of history. He was trying to put asses in chairs and sell out the Globe Theater. And the best way to do that, if you cut the Globe Theater in half, it's a perfect cross-section of Elizabethan society. And his humor and his pacing and his references will speak like he can have a glancing reference to Ovid's Metamorphosis for the royalty, and then he'll make a dick joke for the groundlings, right? He's constantly trying to have something that everybody can feel that they're part of, that communicates to everybody at all levels. At the end of the day, that's always the aim for me. It's like when we talk about Hitchcock, when we talk about Dickens, we don't say, well, were they literary successes or commercial successes, right?
Right.
They were successful. What they did was so staggeringly good that it fulfilled all the requirements in both categories. And why not strive for that? And the other thing I would add about that is, like, we tend to think of Shakespeare as kind of more obscure, abstract, intellectual, but really what he was writing, particularly in the tragedies, are these tales of lust, intrigue, ambition, and murder, right? They're very narrative driven. They're very structured the way that comics are structured. Crime fiction is structured in a way that, for instance, John Updike's work isn't structured in a conventional way, right? And so there's a lot with genre. I mean, he wrote comedies, he wrote tragedies, he wrote histories. He's writing genre. He's writing propulsive, character-driven, and plot-driven works. And the other thing about him, not to get too ranty about this,
no, go ahead.
Very good question, is a lot of what he was doing is taking familiar stories and picking them up and polishing them off and making them his own, right? So the Merchant of Venice, for instance, is based on the Jew of Malta, right? All these books have some predecessor, right? All the plays, I'm sorry, except for The Tempest. The Tempest is the only play that is wholly unique. And if you think about what we're doing, you know, it's like Moon Knight is obviously a tip of the hat to Batman, right? Irredeemable is a book that starts to play with that. The Knighted, I can't write The Knighted unless I'm taking something that's a tradition that I have to kind of love and appreciate and try to get my hands into. I don't want to make fun of it. I don't want to be snotty about it. I loved writing Batman, right? I wrote Moon Knight too.
Yeah.
But I want to take this tradition that I love and that I have a great amount of respect for and figure out what's a different way in that can show different sides of personalities, different kinds of conflicts, different aspects of what it means to be human, what it means to occupy parts of your best self. And so I'm always interested in that. And a lot of the writers that I admire the most and study the most, you know, also had this sort of anxiety of influence of wanting to reference the types of stories and the types of myths that we've come to love. And in a lot of ways, comics are our biggest living and breathing mythology that we have.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that. Boy, that could be a whole nother 40 minutes that we don't have time for now, if you've touched on that. But, you know, look, again, your comics history or bibliography, I should say, is basically all street level guys. I mean, you've even got Full Killer in the mix, for crying out loud. And we've touched on, you know, why you're drawn to the street level guy. I mean, I imagine you've got a Daredevil story in you that's just busting for Marvel to hear the pitch on. But what about the Supermans, the Green Lanterns? I mean, could you find your way to applying your style, your vision for what your strengths in narrative storytelling are and apply it to characters that are not quite so grounded?
Well, I certainly played with that with Batman, with the New 52. You know, part of what I wanted to do is go in and kind of reinvent, with the help of some of the world's greatest artists, right, who I had the advantage of working with, to reinvent the villains. And that some of those stories were certainly bigger. I did have a Shadowland where I crossed in Daredevil. I had Spider-Man swing into one of my Moon Knights, you know, so I managed to get everyone in. And in fact, I have an arc I wrote of the Incredible Hulk. That's one of my favorite things that I've ever written in comics that is sort of on hold. Like, the editor left and then we had an artist thing. And so, but I have all of it written, it's there. And I hope very much one day to kind of revive that. But I don't tend to gravitate, you're right, to Superman and Green Lantern and like sort of bigger crossover events that have that tapestry. It's just not my proclivity. And that said, now and then that will happen, that something comes in and just smacks me and all of a sudden I'm doing it. Like, it was a very big move for me to move from Fool Killer and Punisher even to Moon Knight. That's a very different world to inhabit, right? And then after Moon Knight is when DC, you know, brought me over to do Batman. And that's a whole different sort of level of fantasticalness, right? Of superhero-ness in a certain way. And so, you know, I do like to play and experiment with that, but I find that the things that drive me, I'm so character driven. For me, everything is about the character placed into a plot and just being propelled. And I marvel at guys like, you know, Jeff Johns and like guys who can spin a whole bunch of plates at once and keep all those pieces intact. And they're sort of approaching something. It's just a different part of the sandbox, you know, and I've done some of that. Like Shadowland with Moon Knight was a crossover event that got bigger. I've played with that, but I tend to come around, you know, with AWA when it's, you know, what do you want to do? What do you want to create? To me, I tend to land on something like Knighted, even if it's laid down within this bigger world of the, you know, that we're creating with Straczynski.
Very cool. Mike, do you want to jump back on in?
Yeah, absolutely. Talked about earlier about the vigilante and how you know, Bob's still, you know, struggling to, or he has not found you know, who he is and kind of where he fits into that. Has Bob's story been, or at least the Knight story, has that been around, or is that something that kind of grew when you went to AWA?
It's been in the back of my head for a while.
Okay.
I wrote a piece in the first comic at the end that I kind of described the character and how Peter Parker is my favorite, alias, or is my favorite person, right? And Batman's my favorite superhero. Peter Parker is kind of who I identified with the most, and Batman's who I want to be, And so in some ways, and it's not a coincidence that the logo for Knighted is a yin yang symbol. Right. It's about bringing into balance those two parts. And so I thought like all that humanness of Peter Parker, this kid who tore his costume and kept disappointing his parental figures and, had issues about how to deal with social situations at school. Right. That's not stuff Bruce Wayne ever worried about.
Sure.
But Batman, for me, a lot of what that represented is he doesn't have a magic ring or a cape. He represents the pinnacle that a human can reach if they're devoted to all of it. He's a really Renaissance man, right? It's learning. He's spiritually developed. He's physically developed. Has technological skill, right? He understands art and music. Like there's a lot to him that to me feels very much like being a Renaissance man. And there's an incredible amount of power in that. And so it's one of the things that it's a big part of what went in the blender for me with Orphan X, my book thriller character also. And I think a bunch of fictional characters is who the book is dedicated to throughout time, is who the first Orphan X is dedicated to, because in so many ways, those are the characters and those are the sort of personas that I think a lot of us set as kind of our North Star to have something to aim at.
Right.
Like, so if I feel like I'm much more like Peter Parker because he's real and relatable in so many ways, you want to be aiming at something that is kind of a better version of yourself in a lot of ways. And for me, that's what the Knight represents. And then to have figured out that the Knight was actually pretty corrupt and kind of, I believe the parlance you used was a douchebag.
Yeah.
It gives him somewhere to grow. And in his growing to fill that better and to understand the responsibility that comes with that, that's got to make him a better person.
Right.
And that's a lot of how progress works for us. Like we have to kind of fake it till we make it. It's my favorite quotation in psychology is from William James. It might be apocryphal. I haven't found the exact place that he said it, but he's referred to as saying it, where he says, act like the person you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Bob's got to do. And he's terrified. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to fall into the Nightmobile and get ripped across town and go to a mansion and have instead of finding Alfred as the butler, he's finding someone who's much more like Bernie Mac, right? Ash Devane is the brains of the operation. He knows how everything's run and he's got it going. And Bob's got to do a lot if he wants to keep up with that gentleman.
Yeah, that was that simple, humor of when they when they met each other, and he was like, "Oh, he was a douchebag. Oh, he's great. Oh, this and that." I'm like, "This is good.
Thank you for setting me free."
Yeah,
that's it, right?
So, what led you to AWA with the Knighted project?
Well, I have a long history with Axel Alonso, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel for 13, 15 years, something like that. And Axel was my first editor. He's actually the only editor who I had at Marvel. And he kind of crossed me over from novels when we talked, and, first with Fool Killer. And then I got to write The Punisher, which was my favorite character growing up. I mean, far and away. And,
awesome.
When Garth Ennis's run for me was really opening my eyes as a, published author to what comics could be rather than the fanboy when I was younger. Sure. And then when Garth left, I wrote the first arc after he left. And it was this sort of very surreal experience of no longer going to my local comic book shop to buy my favorite comic because I was writing it and I already knew what would happen, And so Axel and I go back a long ways. And so I've been involved when he launched AWA. He pulled in Garth, he pulled in Straczynski, he pulled me in, some of us to be on this creative council for the venture. And so we all have contributed in that way and had conversations about who we want to take. And it was kind of a no-brainer for me to take, the character who would fill the cowl in that Moon Knight Batman space. And so that's how it sort of went. Was it was the project first. I really like working with people who I trust, who I not only have great creative taste, but who I trust. And I find there's a lot, better creativity comes out of that. It's just like having an artist who you trust.
Sure.
I lay out the whole script, and Shara's going to get to something. And if he's got a way to make it better and tell that story better visually than how I imagined it with my two-dimensional brain, he's going to do that, and the story's going to be better. And at the end of the day, he's going to look like the incredible talent he is, and I'm going to look like a better writer than I am. So it's not a bad trade.
Right.
Well, you kind of lucked out on the art department, man. You got Mark Texera drawing this thing. How in the world did that magic piece fall into place?
That was another relationship. He came in through Axel. I'm a huge fan of his ghostwriter work in particular.
Absolutely.
Classic.
And he was just the right tone. Like, for a guy who can do street level stuff, if we're spinning off of some characters in comics and creating a world that's not dissimilar to the ones that we want, why not have a big A-list marquee talent who's done that stuff to come over and do it here? And so it was great. I've been so fortunate with artists. I've worked with the best artists in the world. I had David Finch on Batman, Ethan Van Sciver, Alex Maleev, Neil Adams illustrated my last Batman story for the anniversary edition. I mean, so it's been amazing for me as someone who I can't draw stick figures. I have the extent to which I'm awful. I actually had a conversation with Alex Maleev once that he said, I was describing something and he didn't quite know the angle. He said, can you just draw it and fax it over to me so I can have some idea? I said, I literally can't do that. I don't understand how perspective works. He said, that's what every writer says. Just go ahead and do it. So I drew out this little sketch for the perspective and I scanned it. I emailed it over to him and he was like, man, you really are awful. I have no idea what you're trying to say. He was just like, there is no, I can't make things come out of a pen in my hand that resemble art. And so I'm so reliant on them. I can see it in my head. I can capture it with words, but like the kind of regard for that. And then working with colorists, we have a great letterer. I was down to choosing the letterer we wanted to get. And so when getting all the pieces of talent, I learned this from movies, from film, and from TV, which is with talent, you're either, if you do your work right and you build the team right, it becomes a positive feedback loop. Like everyone is better, everything becomes better. And if you don't do that, then you're like the drunk guy out behind the bar at 4 a.m. with a broken bottle, trying to protect your script from everyone who's going to screw it up, and everyone hates you because you don't know what you've screwed up, and it just turns into a mess. And so it was important to really build the team out right.
That makes sense. And so looking ahead, I mean, today is literally day one for Knighted, and there's still 4 more issues to go, but I assume you have more planned out for this world or other projects at AWA. And I mean, I hope we can see him soon, but you're a busy cat. I was looking over the Orphan X books, and you've come out with one a year for coming on 7 years now.
Yeah.
You're kind of prolific. I mean, I'm a little jealous of you, dude. When do you sleep? How do you find time for all of this stuff?
The thing is if you love what you're doing, it just doesn't feel like work, So if I'm going well, I forget to eat. I have to remind myself to go exercise. Like, it's not that the writing is hard. When it's tough to get into it, when I'm distracted, that's a challenge. I don't mean to imply it's just a breeze, but when things are clicking, there's nothing I'd rather be doing. And so it makes it easier to kind of be inadvertently prolific, because what's really happening is I'm just thinking about the story a lot and trying to get it out of my brain.
So do you have to impose like certain hours of the day for writing on yourself?
It's all day, every day.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I've been doing it.
I think I read Stephen King somewhere saying, like, I write between 9 and 5, like it's my office job. And then I go home and live my life. And maybe it wasn't Stephen King. I could be misattributing, but everyone has their own.
That's about it, but if I have different stuff, right? If I have a movie on location, right? I go to that. With comics, I have pages coming in, right? We're launching a comic. So I have the opportunity to be here and talk to you guys on the night of the launch. I'm going to do that, even if it might be after 5 o'clock, right? I have a couple more things notes I got to take. Sometimes if I'm on deadline for something external, I got to get to that later. But for the most part, I try and kind of bookend myself from 7 to 5 every day.
Sounds like a good, healthy balance.
Right.
Mike, do you want to jump back on in?
Yeah, real quick, Greg. You mentioned earlier that growing up, Spider-Man was one of your favorites. The night it has a kind of like a late bronze to early modern age feel to it, where it was just kind of like you're on this ride and you have, you know, the character development, and it kind of leaves you wanting more. Were you a fan? Were you a fan of that era? Like Tom DeFalco in influence around that time? Or
you know, it's funny for me. It was much more like I love the early, you know, the Stan Lee, like I had those big fat books you can get that just like the complete early stuff. I love right. I had all those. You know, when I was a kid, you know, when I was in 7th grade, I can't do years or anything, but, you know, call it the 80s, early 90s was when I was really into it. But, you know, they had Web of Spider-Man that was recycling a lot of the, remember, because there was Amazing Spider-Man Moving Forward and Web of Spider-Man was the older stuff. Absolutely. I loved all that. And then we were also starting to turn the corner to that gritty, you know, like we had the Punisher miniseries, which was amazing, you know, and then it went to the Unlimited. And of course I bought like 20 copies of Punisher #1 Unlimited because I was going to like pay for college with that one day. And I think they're now, instead of being 75 cents, they're worth $1.50 each. So that worked out well. But, you know, the Wolverine Limited, I was hard on that stuff. And then, you know, we're turning the corner. We got Frank Miller. It was all that stuff. There was weird Vertigo stuff. I had Lone Wolf and Cub flying in, right? Some weird, like stuff like that was just unconventional that I could kind of dive into and start chewing on and opening up to all these different cultures and different artists. And, you know, I loved reading stuff from different countries. And so that was sort of the mix that I was in. You know, and some stuff was later. I mean, I couldn't read. So Swamp Thing, I tried to read 4 times in my life, never could get into it. And about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, the 5th try, obsessed with it, right? Like to the point where I'm like, I understand now that this is one of the great literary works of the 20th century, which I don't say lightly. It is spectacular. I couldn't find my way into that until, you know, a bit later. And so it's weird because I think that our tastes kind of ebb and flow and move, you know, and sometimes it happens. And something about Alan Moore and that story, I just couldn't open my brain up to take in what he was doing till it was much later. And so it's weird what things I kind of return to and look at now. And there's some stuff I was super into that I go back and read and go, how is this compelling to me, let alone that I was obsessed with it, you know?
Like, why do I still have this? This is horrible.
Yeah, right.
It's horrible now.
But I love it.
That's right.
Welcome to fandom. Well, Greg, I know you're running short on time, but I really wanted to just let you know that we appreciate you coming and hanging with us for the brief time that you had. And United really is a cool read. I want people to give it a try because, you know, AWA is doing good stuff. And right now, there's a dumb amount of good independent comics companies out there, and to a degree that some United, for as many virtues as it has, could get lost in the shuffle because I mean there's just there's Boom, there's Aftershock, there's AWA, there's all these quality companies out there. So I just really want people to hear it and understand this is a cool book. Greg is a great author, and man, just check it out. Take a chance on something new. And, Greg, this is kind of your, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think this is your first foray in comics into original concepts, characters, and content, right?
That's right. I mean, I created some characters in the runs of other books, but that's not the same thing. I mean, it's not like starting out and building a world. And I think that was one of the things that was, you know, a big draw for me to come back to comics after taking a bit of a break.
Most definitely. And now you're playing in J. Michael Straczynski's sandbox, but it seems like, there's probably a few ground rules. Okay, this, that, or the other. The Great Death happened, but other than that, you seem like you got a wider amount of latitude that
That's right.
you've
That's
been
right.
given.
And we coordinate some, but it's not. It's everyone's got a lot of creative elbow room. So we're building out this world together, but also making sure that each book has its own, energy, and that each book can be a fulfilling story on its own. It's got to stand on its own feet.
Absolutely, it does. And again, you could just pick Night It Up Cold and enjoy it without knowing anything else about the world at AWA that Straczynski has been building. So that, to me, is a pretty cool accomplishment in and of itself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate both you guys having me on. And as always, enthusiasm in comics, enthusiasm in anything is the coin of the realm,
Right.
It's the whole deal. So it's always important to figure out, and to have conversations about stuff when people are genuinely excited about it. It's the only thing that matters. It's the only reason we do our job the way we do it. So,
hey, man,
you having me on.
Living the dream, dude. I appreciate everything that you're doing. So,
thank you.
I know you got another meeting to get to, but Gregg Hurwitz, everybody, thank you so much for stopping in, Greg.
Sure thing. Take care.
All right, my friend. Bye.
Bye.
Nice talking with you.
You too.
Oh, you can just kill it.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Little awkward. Sorry. Woo, that got weird. What a cool dude, though, Mike.
That was great. That was great.
That was
And we're still live.
transition.
Yeah.
But we kind of like rushed into the interview, and because of the flub at the beginning, my whole mojo was off. Thank God you were here to help me out.
That was good though. Yeah, the Knighted was really good. And then the one question I kind of stumbled on my questioning, but it really did.
I wondered where that Tom DeFalco question came from.
Because he said that he was a fan of Spider-Man and stuff like that, and this book really had like that end of the Bronze Age going into the modern age, just that feel of it, that pace of it,
kind of a Copper Age,
and I'm
mid 80s, late 80s,
right. And I wasn't comparing him to Starlin or DeFalco or something like that, but I was just because I was like, well, DeFalco actually had that that great run and stuff like that, so I just kind of, it was like that name, and I was like, it didn't help that I was stumbling like I was walking on my daughter's Legos during that question. So but yeah, no, the Knighted was really cool. The Knighted was really, really cool.
It was. And AWA is putting out so many good quality books, and it's really obvious that Axel Alonso and everyone involved over there has a good, solid quality vision for where they want to go.
Yeah, and
what the cohesive feel for the universe and the line as a whole is.
Yeah,
so,
and I love how they're not really in a rush to do anything. Like they're not doing weekly books, and then they're not sitting here and playing with distribution and all. They're just they're kind of just almost meticulously putting out quality book after quality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you got stuff from Ben Percy, you got stuff from Garth Ennis, Straczynski, Hurwitz.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of good quality work out of AWA.
Yeah, and because even a lot of times these teams may know like the artist and not the writer or the letterer, but then you get a book where you might have like Percy and Lou Ridge and Straczynski, just a gag of people that and you're like, oh, okay. So and it's just almost like, I think they do the comic buffet better than anybody else right now, as far as they can have all these books out, and that's not taken away from obviously like Boom and stuff like that, but I just think as when you take the stack of books, I think AWA just has that better line right now on the shelves.
I think I agree with that to the extent that we're talking about being able to lure quality talent in for like a project or two projects or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, shit. I had no idea until I opened our press copy of Knighted that freaking Mark Texeira did the art on it, right? Like, he doesn't work very much anymore. He doesn't need to. But
for sure. Yeah, he can do what he
the
wants.
dude's a legend. He does not need to work any more than he wants to.
Right.
So yeah, that was just like this pleasant little surprise, and that got me wondering, like, what the hell? How's Mark Texeira connected to this? The people at AWA, but I hadn't even thought about Hurwitz and Axel Alonso having that connection from Marvel.
Yeah.
But yeah, when he started there, Axel was editor in chief. So yeah, that actually makes total sense in retrospect.
And the thing, I never would have
not occurred to me at all.
Something, until he was like, "Oh yeah, I know Axel from we're at Marvel." I'm like, "Oh yeah." I guess.
Well, I mean, really, Axel Alonso is one of those people that I think basically anyone that's worked in comics like between 1995 to now, I guess, probably knows or has worked for Axel Alonso at some point, because he was at Vertigo and he was at Marvel, and now he's running AWA. I mean, you touch on a lot of talent in with the resume like that.
Yeah, I mean, dare I say, is he the modern, Jim Shooter?
I don't know if I would agree with the Shooter comparison.
Well, I mean, we'll give AWA a few more years, but I mean, there is
like, if you're comparing AWA to Shooter's companies post Marvel, like both Valiant and Defiant,
right?
I would say, yeah, Valiant for a while, that first run, but then it imploded. And we certainly hope that doesn't happen with AWA.
No, absolutely.
And then, Defiant, that was a blip.
Right.
And then, Shooter just went and pissed off everybody.
Well, I'm saying, as far as like, tenacity and quality, and just the folks that they're luring in and stuff like that. Not on like a personality level or nothing like that, but I'm saying just like on titles and just the army of talent that they get to work with. And I mean, I
think there's something, okay, using that comparison, I think you're probably onto something, because I don't think you're going to find very many people that would argue against Marvel in the 80s being second only to Marvel in the 60s.
True.
In the terms of that company's history. And a lot of that had to do with the talent that Shooter not only was able to lure in, but basically said, do your thing.
Yeah.
And while Axel was kind of building on what Quesada had done in that same vein at Marvel in the most of the 2000s, very late 90s to 2000s, he didn't build that, so to speak. But did not mean to bring that up.
Oopsie.
We got political after all tonight. But I mean, he definitely took what Quesada had put in place and ran with it. And I mean, you're going to get a lot of differing opinions, because Marvel during Axel's tenure became super reliant on event comics and things like that. And that's unfortunate. But I can't also say that that's 100% Axel Alonso's fault either. And looking at that time that he was running things there before CB Cebulski became EIC and pretended to be Japanese, or whatever order it happened in, there's a ton of quality good Marvel books that came out in that time.
Oh, for sure there is. And I think
Fraction on Hawkeye, Charles Soule and Javier Polito on She-Hulk, Fraction again, Matt Fraction.
Matt Fraction.
Yeah, his name pops up again and again. Matt Fraction on I just went blank. The other thing I liked him on. I mean, Brubaker, Reminder really broke big during out. Yeah, I mean, dude knows what he's doing. I'm not going to be shocked to find out that when AWA winds up standing the test of time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They're here for the long haul.
Are they going to be the next Image? Probably not.
Well,
They have a much smaller portfolio and they have a very different business model.
true, but I think as far as longevity,
Longevity, maybe. We'll
yeah,
see.
yeah,
Comics market is nothing if not tumultuous.
no,
And I mean, right now we're having a wonderful boom of all of these independent companies that you can get all this quality stuff for, beyond Marvel, beyond Image, beyond Dark Horse, which we kind of think of as the big 2+2.
right, sure, that's fair.
Right?
That's fair.
And I mean, Scout,
Well,
I mean, all these cool companies.
yeah, and the great thing about that is that like now you see the shops are actually ordering them without people making necessarily special orders for them.
Right.
Years ago, if you wanted, this weird book from this weird company that no one's ever heard of, you needed to be in previews religiously
Mm-hmm.
and making sure you had those orders in ahead of time, or else you weren't getting the odd book from this odd company. And it really wasn't an odd company. It just wasn't Marvel or DC.
Right.
But now, I mean, at least at my main shop, like now it's you got Marvel and DC, but the section of indie titles is starting to grow, and you're seeing seeing the multiple.
Oh, absolutely.
You're seeing
I shop at 2 comic shops, and one of them had to completely rearrange their shelves and like move a bunch of stuff around to accommodate to expand their space for indie books. There just wasn't room on the shelf anymore.
And which is great because I mean it's like the table is so big, there's plenty of room for everyone to sit and kind of have a chance to
Yeah, absolutely.
to get a slice.
Of course, it's a double-edged sword. Like I was saying with Knighted, it's a good solid comic,
right.
But with so much quality content from so many quality publishers out there, it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. So I was like really flattered and humble that we got to be the first interview for this book after it went live. That's just like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that.
The Knighted is definitely a book that I hope does well. Really hope.
Most definitely. Because sometimes, look, not every novelist turned comics writer is gonna be Greg Rucka.
Sure.
Who's equally at home in both worlds.
Right.
And Greg, he's, not as prolific in the world of comics, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to be. Again, not everybody's going to be Greg Rucka.
Sure.
But what he has made clear throughout his relatively brief in terms of content resume that's been through his time writing comics is that he's learned the ropes pretty dang well. He knows how to write a story and have it translate into comics.
Yeah, and his character
helps, like he said, that he's working with so many top-notch artists, but you can tell when somebody that's maybe a screenwriter or a novelist or somewhere outside of the realm of writing comics makes that leap, and it's a little creaky at first. Even Ta-Nehisi Coates, that first year with Black Panther, is it's not your typical comics read. It's lots and lots and lots and lots of people standing around talking and having philosophical discussions. And I actually love that. But you can tell the way that it's written and staged that it is the work of someone that is absolutely not used to writing comics.
Yeah, but that's one thing I enjoyed about the Knighted and Hurwitz's other stuff is that his character work is pretty solid. It's pretty spot on. It doesn't have that feeling, like you said, that famous feeling where it's like, you only got so many pages to build and execute. Whereas with books, obviously 200, 300, 400, however pages you have, then if, there's part 2s, you got even more time. But even like with the Knighted, I mean, Bob, I want to know more. I don't necessarily need to know about the Knight. I need to know about Bob's life. Is his apartment messy? Is he like Peter from Office Space? Is he completely unhappy with his life? I mean,
he seems pretty unhappy, although it's also the sort of unhappy that maybe he didn't realize he was as unhappy as he was until till his fiance turned him down very publicly.
Right. Like I
For
totally
not being the better version of him, or God, however she phrased it, was just like gut wrenching and painful to read.
oh, brutal.
I want you, but not you, or however the hell she put it.
Like I'm in love with the thought of you, just not you.
Yeah, that was it. Oh my God, that's terrible. Who does that?
Oh God. You close the comic, you're like, oh, I'm getting flashbacks.
Oh God, this is just I'm getting flashbacks to high school. I like you as a friend. Yeah. Well, Mike, I think we've had a stellar show.
It was good. It was fun.
It's a little short this week, but that's okay. You all don't need us blathering on endlessly because we have future shows for that. We have
and Twitter
for the future shows and the Twitter. So, despite the weird opening snafu where we didn't get to play our customary intro
or outro,
and we're going to play the outro. Damn it!
Okay.
Thank y'all so much for listening. You should definitely check out Knighted from AWA. And again, just if we haven't said it enough, you should totally support independent comics. Get out there, try something new. Don't be scared because it's not a familiar IP. In fact, if it's not a familiar IP, you should probably have more incentive therein to check it out.
And I was going to say, talking about supporting indie comics, don't be afraid to go to Kickstarter.com and search comic books.
Yes.
You will be surprised what comes up. There's tons of YA, there's tons of kid stuff, there's regular comics, however you want to put it, superhero stuff. Tons of great representation in those comics as well. So
absolutely. Matter of fact, one of those Kickstarter books, the OZ from friend of the show David Pipos, it won a Ringo. Yeah. So there's super awesome, dope stuff out there, guys. It's not just for weird people like us that can't figure out how to break into comics ourselves anymore. No, I'm just kidding. Much love to
He's not kidding. He's not kidding. That's why we're doing this. He's not kidding.
Shut up. All right, guys. Until next week, read something cool, support your local comic book store, and as ever, be